The house was perfect. Large backyard, spacious garage, a balcony where I could have my morning coffee without worrying about nosy neighbors. Even better, it wasn't part of the HOA. That was one of the main reasons I bought it. No absurd fees, no stupid regulations about the color of the door or the allowed size of the lawn. But it seems that someone didn't like that at all. On the second day after moving in, I heard knocks on the door. Not light, polite knocks, but firm knocks, as if whoever was on the other side was in a hurry. When I opened the door, I was confronted by a woman in an impeccable blouse, a forced smile, and a clipboard in her hands. "Welcome to the neighborhood. I'm the president of the HOA, and I've come to deliver your membership paperwork." I took the papers out of politeness, but it only took a quick glance to see the absurdity. A monthly fee of $500, rules about the type of plants allowed, ridiculous requirements about the upkeep of the house. There must be a mistake. My house is not part of the HOA. Her smile faltered for a second, but soon returned to her face. "Oh, everyone here participates. We keep the community organized." I crossed my arms. "I don't participate." Her posture hardened. Her previously friendly gaze took on a sharp glint, as if I had just declared war on her existence. She tried to argue some more, insisting that it would be better for me to follow the HOA rules, but I closed the door before she could continue, and that's how it all began. The next morning, as I left for work, I found a fine in my mailbox, $250 for substandard lawn. Curious, I looked at the lawn. The grass was freshly cut, impeccable. Clearly, this wasn't about aesthetics. It was about control. The days passed, and the fines kept coming. $100 for a badly parked car in my own garage. $300 for curtains not matching the aesthetics of the neighborhood. $200 for garbage placed on the sidewalk before the allowed time, even though it was on time. It was obvious what was going on. The woman wanted to force me to give in, to pay the fees, to join the HOA out of exhaustion. Her problem? I'm a lawyer, and I knew exactly how to handle it. I sent a legal notice, explaining that my house was not under the jurisdiction of the HOA, and that any further attempts to collect would be considered harassment. That should have been the end of it, but some people don't know how to lose. The next day, I noticed someone hanging around my house. I caught a glimpse through the window. It wasn't just any neighbor. It was her. The HOA had lost its legal power over me, so now she was willing to go beyond the rules. That night, I woke up to a strong smell of smoke. Instinct made me jump out of bed and run outside, and that's when I saw it. Flames rising on the side of my garage. The fire danced in the dark, reflecting on the faces of the neighbors who came out of their houses, frightened. The sirens of the fire department echoed in the distance, but all I could focus on was her silhouette, standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed, watching it all as if it were a spectacle. The woman had spent weeks trying to force me into submission. Now she was ready to destroy me completely. But what she didn't know was that she had chosen the worst person to try to bring down. The flames rose quickly, consuming the side of my garage like a hungry beast. The heat was suffocating, the thick smoke billowing into the air, invading my nostrils and burning my throat. The neighbors began to come out of their houses, some horrified, others just watching as if they were watching a free show of urban tragedy. But in their midst, she was there, the woman who had spent weeks trying to crush me with ridiculous fines, who showed up at my door with an HOA contract thinking she could make me sign it, who watched every attempt to control me fail miserably. Now, she was standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed, in no hurry to move, as if she were enjoying every second of the chaos. The fire department arrived in a matter of minutes, their sirens cutting through the early morning silence. I ran up to them, pointing at the burning garage, while the team began working quickly to contain the fire before it spread. The fire took a while to subside. When the last flames were finally extinguished, all that remained was a trail of charred destruction. The side of my house was damaged, My garage was practically unusable, and the smell of burning permeated every inch of the street. The firemen began to inspect the wreckage. One of them bent down and shone his flashlight over the concrete, frowning. He touched something on the ground, rubbed his fingers together, and smelled it. "There are traces of accelerant here," he said, calling the team leader. "It wasn't an accident." The fire chief approached, crouched down next to the other man, and analyzed the scene. "It looks like arson. We need to call in forensics." The words hung in the air like a gavel. If there was any doubt left in the neighbors' minds, it was crushed in that instant. The fire was no accident. Someone had set it intentionally, and that woman didn't move, didn't try to justify herself, didn't show the slightest shock. I took a deep breath and approached the policeman who arrived soon after, explaining the situation. He took out a notepad and started asking the usual questions. "Do you have any suspicions about who might have done this?" My answer was immediate. The president of the HOA spent weeks harassing me because I refused membership. When all attempts failed, my house caught fire out of nowhere. The officer exchanged a quick glance with another colleague and wrote down the information. I looked around, and the neighbors, who had previously remained silent, began to murmur among themselves. Some expressions were of surprise, but others were different. Some of them didn't seem surprised at all, as if they already knew what this woman was capable of. The policeman closed his notebook and looked at me. "We'll need the security recordings." I'd expected that. I walked over to the side of the house where the external camera center was and tried to access the files. But when I opened the system, something was wrong. Last night's history had been deleted. But her problem? She didn't know I had an external backup. I took out my cell phone and accessed the cloud account. The files were all there. I played back the recording of the exact moment the fire started. The camera didn't capture her face directly, but her silhouette, her clothes, and the way she walked were unmistakable. I showed it to the policeman, who analyzed the video carefully. He looked at the woman, still motionless on the sidewalk, and then at me. "That's enough for us to investigate further." The woman finally decided to react. "This is ridiculous!" she exploded, her eyes wide. "You're accusing me without proof." The policeman remained serious. "We'll take it to forensics. If you have nothing to hide, you don't have to worry." Her body went rigid. For the first time, she looked really scared, because she knew that when the evidence was analyzed, her case would completely fall apart. The silence that followed the police officer's speech was deafening. The neighbors, once merely curious onlookers, were now paralyzed, absorbing the scene. What had previously been just rumors and murmurs about the woman's obsessive behavior had now become something real. She tried to laugh, a short, dry, forced laugh, the typical laugh of someone who has realized that they have lost control of the situation. "Do you really think I would do something like that? How absurd!" The policeman didn't reply immediately. He just kept his gaze steady, analyzing her every move. Her posture was different. The arrogance from earlier in the evening had disappeared, replaced by something much more interesting: nervousness. The firemen were still at the scene, finishing their inspection. One of them approached the officer and handed over a small plastic bag with a piece of soaked cloth. "We found this at the back, near the garage. It was probably used to spread the fire accelerant. We'll send it for analysis." The policeman took the bag and turned to the woman, who was visibly pale. If there was any doubt left, there was no way out for her now. I began to notice something interesting. Some of the neighbors were exchanging looks of complicity. Some seemed surprised, but others had clearly expected something like this to happen, as if it wasn't the first time that woman had crossed a line. A couple who lived next door approached the policeman and started talking quietly. "She's done things like this before," muttered the woman, casting a discreet glance in the suspect's direction. "No fire, but she's always been dangerous. When a family here refused to enter the HOA a few years ago, the tires of their car were slashed. Then graffiti started appearing on their fence." Her husband added, "A month later, the house was sold for way below market price. They left out of the blue. without even saying goodbye. The policeman wrote down the information and turned to the woman again. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The siege was closing in faster than she expected. When the officers asked her to accompany them to the police station to give her statement, the explosion everyone had been waiting for finally came. "This is a conspiracy against me," she shouted, her hands shaking with rage. "He's lying. You're all against me because you don't want to respect the rules." The surrounding neighbors took a few steps back, shocked by her sudden outburst. For the first time, everyone could clearly see what had previously only happened behind the scenes. It wasn't about rules, safety, or community. It was about power. And now, she was about to lose everything. The policeman remained unperturbed. He maintained his professional posture as he opened the car door and motioned for her to get in. She looked around for support, for someone to defend her, but no one moved a muscle. Not a single neighbor spoke up for her. When the car door slammed and the vehicle began to drive away, I saw something curious. Some of the neighbors smiled. They were relieved. The woman who had spent years terrorizing the neighborhood was finally facing the consequences of her actions. But it wasn't over yet. The sun rose in a different neighborhood. Not because the houses had changed, but because for the first time in years, the neighbors could breathe without fear. The woman who had spent so long turning that community into a personal fiefdom was no longer there. Instead of prowling the streets, handing out fines and absurd demands, she was sitting in a cell, awaiting the trial that would define her fate. But that wasn't luck. It was a consequence. The forensics confirmed what everyone already knew. The fire was no accident. The side of my garage had been doused with a chemical accelerant, and the traces left on the ground indicated that someone had intentionally poured the liquid on it before setting it alight. The footage from the neighbors' cameras helped put together a solid case. The video didn't capture her face directly, but her silhouette, the way she walked, and her clothes were identical to the ones she was wearing that night. The neighbors started talking, at first quietly, as if they were afraid of something happening. But as the days went by, the stories came out. She had done things like this before. Not arson, but harassment, intimidation, veiled threats. When a resident refused the HOA's rules a few years ago, his car tires were slashed. A few weeks later, the fence of his house was graffitied with insults. Shortly afterwards, he sold the house and left, without even saying goodbye. And that wasn't the only story. Other neighbors reported that when they tried to complain about the HOA's absurd fees, they experienced mysterious little incidents. Broken windows, threatening letters left in the mailbox, unexpected visits from city inspectors who, curiously, always showed up after some disagreement with her. But now it was no longer a dirty game behind the scenes. Now she was being officially investigated for arson. Her lawyer tried to reduce the damage. He suggested a plea bargain, a way to wrap things up quietly. But there was no deal to be made. The woman tried to destroy my home, my security, my peace of mind. Now I would destroy what little remained of her life within the law. The trial was quick. The evidence was overwhelming. Forensics showed that the fire accelerant used in my garage was the same one found in her house. The recordings confirmed that she was prowling around my property that night. The neighbors' testimonies destroyed any attempt at a defense. And then came the verdict: guilty. The judge had no doubts. The crime was not just an act of personal revenge, but a risk to the whole neighborhood. The fire could have spread. It could have put other families in danger. The sentence included imprisonment, a fine high enough to wipe out any financial stability she had, and a civil suit to cover the damages. But that wasn't the worst thing for her. The worst was seeing the empire she had built crumble. The HOA, the association she used as a weapon to control others, was dissolved. Without their leader to manipulate the rules, the residents themselves voted to end the HOA's activities forever. The abusive fines disappeared. The ridiculous rules were annulled. The neighborhood, which had previously been suffocated by its presence, became a place where people could finally live in peace. The most ironic thing? The woman who tried to kick me out of the neighborhood was the one who had to leave forever. And what about me? I rebuilt my garage, got a fat severance package, and continued to live exactly where I wanted to. She tried to destroy me, but she only succeeded in destroying herself. And if you liked this video, don't forget to leave a comment and a like.